Addie, I want to go to you and have you go to Simone. But there is deep resentment. Donald Trump telling people at that fundraiser they rigged the election in 2020 and stole it from me. The deep state tried to kill me, and now basically saying they're trying to rig this election too. And I thought it was just one of those defining moments when they kept trying to get him at this fundraiser to talk about inflation, tried to get him to talk about the border, tried to get him talking about the economy. And his response was, and he's right, he said, I am who I am. If anybody's expecting another gear from Donald Trump, then they're sadly mistaken. He is who he is. And I think he's decided he's going to win or lose doing exactly what we saw him do this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, he said just after the shooting against him, he, for a very short period of time, said he was going to play nice. He was asked to play nice. He actually said, I have been asked to be nice. And he did it for a few days. And then he said, and then he announced that's over now. And he went back to being who he is. And Donald Trump, firmly believes that in 2016 he won that election because he was who he was and because he ran the campaign the way he wanted it to be and because he said outrageous things. And now that he's kind of reverting to type in 2020, in 2024, he's going to try that same playbook again. The problem is that all of the poll numbers, the money is now shifting against him. I mean, I think the comparison with 2008 is apt. This feels like a freight train. Something could go wrong, and if it goes wrong, Kamala Harris will have to recover fast because there isn't much time. But, Simone, I mean, even if you just look at that one number, back in February in an NBC poll, Joe Biden was 20 points behind Donald Trump when it came to the handling of the economy. Kamala Harris today is just 6 points behind. I mean, it's on all of the big issues that Donald Trump needs to run on, it's moving against him.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers in these polls are, in fact, remarkable. As I've been, talking to folks over the last couple of days, a lot of Democratic strategists are excited about what they're seeing in these numbers, and then my Republican friends are a little nervous. I would caution folks, though, the way presidential races are ran and won are not, in fact, on national polls, if you will. They're won state by state, district by district. And so some of this battleground state polling, I think, is a little more indicative of where folks are. And it is still a little early, though. I think when we look at post, the end of this month, I would argue post-convention, beginning of September, that is when things will start to settle. And remember, as early as, I believe, September 7th or 6th, people start voting in this country. The momentum here is amazing. The crowds, I heard Joe earlier talking about the crowds, are literally insane. But, I worked for Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, and I can tell you the crowds do not vote always. And so one of the things that the Harris campaign is doing that I think is extremely smart, which is if they, in fact, are successful at winning this race, it will be because of the infrastructure that they have built in their battleground operation. On the weekend, we talked to the battleground states director for the Harris Walz campaign just to ask, what are they doing? And we had him on, I think, the first weekend in August, and they talked about the fact that they had 200,000 volunteer signups for 29,000 canvases and 197,000 phone bank shifts. I just want to be clear. 197 phone bank shifts as a former campaign staffer, that's a lot of shifts. That's a lot of people. They said they had 750,000 new supporters. And so what they are saying is that they see these crowds, they're excited about the crowds, but they're using this surge of energy to register folks, to persuade and help turn out voters in November. So folks who are already registered, people who want to do the work, they're signing them up to do that voter-to-voter contact on the phones, but also canvassing. And that is what's going to make the difference in this election. I don't see a Trump infrastructure like what the Harris campaign has built.
Yeah, and what the Harris team has done also, of course, is inherited a lot of the infrastructure from the Biden team. And even when the president was faltering in the polls, the work was still there. They had built this impressive battleground state operation. And, of course, it's a lot of the same people, Biden seamlessly now to Harris. Tom Nichols, we think we have fixed your audio, so let's tee you back up here. Just your thoughts on this moment in the race, and particularly Donald Trump's inability to adjust.
Well, sorry, but apparently the Russian jamming is now over.
Again.
What I was going to say was that asking Donald Trump for a positive vision of what he wants to do for the country is pointless. because that's not why he's running. He's running as a grudge match, and he's running to stay out of jail. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this, and with all due respect to President Biden, who I think's had a great first term, but that I wrote about as having my doubts about whether he could carry on a campaign, is there was a lot of kind of bottled up strategy and enthusiasm because this was just going to be a kind of grudge match slug out between these two old warriors who had clashed once before. I think what you're seeing now is that a lot of people are getting involved in the kind of campaign they would rather run, rather than simply saying, look, we have to kind of tough this out one more time to save democracy. You've got a lot of real energy and positive messaging, and Trump's not capable of that. You can almost see him. He doesn't understand any of this now. Like, he doesn't get anything about this election because he's always run on carnage and doom and misery. And so, thousands of Americans showing up looking happy, something he's not really used to, because even his rallies are just big expressions of, anger and rage and him kind of going on, with these Festivus grievances for 2 hours. I think he's genuinely wrong-footed by this and doesn't understand maybe that 2016 was a fluke.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the campaigns as defined by the candidates. Kamala Harris says she's about joy. Donald Trump says he's about retribution. I am your retribution. And except for 2016, that just hasn't worked in American politics.